Hello and welcome to the final session of Wednesday's instalment of Intra Amsterdam Virtual Festival. Firstly, I'd like to say a huge thanks to Peter and John for their brilliant talks earlier on. So we are really excited for our next session, which is from a speaker who we are huge fans of here at NAVIGABLE. It's Andrew Hinton. Among many other things, Andrew leads the design, strategy and research team at Honeywell Connected Enterprise in Atlanta, and is also the author of Understanding Context, a book about how people make sense of their environments and how to use information to make better places. As always, please do say hello to each other in the chat and make sure you've switched your chat settings to panelists and attendees so everyone can see your messages. And do let us know if there's any issues with the stream too. Ask lots of questions using the Q&A box, and I will ask these to Andrew at the end, and I'll try and get through as many as I can in the time. So without further ado, I will hand over to Andrew to kick things off for his talk called What We Talk About When We Talk About Navigation.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. I've always wanted to visit Amsterdam, and it is beautiful here. It's just great. It's a beautiful city. No, I'm kidding, of course. I do hope to one day corporeally in meat space visit Amsterdam, but this is a close second, and I'm honored to be asked to talk to you all today. So let's jump in. Rather than burying the lead here, I'm just going to go ahead and say that what I'm talking about here essentially is that navigation is not just a menu on a screen. Navigation is what people do. And I think it's time that we broaden, complicate, expand the way that we as professionals talk about navigation in our work, because it's just going to be more and more important that we not reduce it to quite as much as I think we've been used to doing in user experience design, and that we broaden our aperture in terms of how we think about what navigation is. I'm going to break this down into two parts. The first is just about navigation with screens, but then we're going to talk about navigation with everything else. So screens, because that's what most of us are being asked to work on in most of our jobs these days, right? If you look at information online about how to design navigation for screen-based software, it's all about menus. In fact, if you just Google navigation, and a ton of what comes up really is about screen design, UI design. And over time, we've come to conflate navigation, as in the act of navigating, with the menu systems on websites and applications and digital interactions. Wikipedia, which if it's anything, it's a sort of weather vane for conventional meanings of things, tells us that navigation is really all about the various styles and types of menus that we interact with in software. Now, I'm not saying that menu systems are not important. They absolutely are. They're critical. And they're also challenging and complex things to figure out. And that's why we have seemingly endless debates in schools of thought about where to put menus and how they should be shaped and what icons we should use for them and what we should put in them. Remember the great hamburger menu trend and backlash just a few years ago? Suddenly the conventional wisdom shifted because it turned out that when you hide things from people, they interact with them less. Of course, hopefully most of you realize that there is no one size fits all answer to this, even if the discourse in the community tends to swing the pendulum to, oh, it's bad, oh, it's good, skeuomorphism's bad, skeuomorphism's good. Like that's more fun than just saying, well, it depends. But still, we did sort of all have this aha moment when we were realizing, like, oh, hang on, people are not engaging with really key pieces of the software if they don't know they exist. Who knew? It means the thing is that we're really constraining the way that we talk about how people navigate an environment to just a subset of a screen, right? So even just if you're talking about UI design in screens, more often than not, in my experience, when people say the navigation, they're really talking about the things you click that give you the menus to pick a thing, right? Anything that a user can tap or click to navigate. And the thing is that we can use all that other space now, right? If we're constraining navigation to menus, to the little ribbons of things that we click to make them expand, that means that the rest of all the space is just open to whatever else we want to use it for, that especially whatever the organization that's paying us to design things wants to use it for. So if users don't need that whole screen to find their way around that software environment, there's all this room that they can use to cram other stuff in. This is a screenshot from, gosh, it may be up to 10 years ago, but it is the gift that keeps on giving. How would you tell this is the website for a major metropolitan area's newspaper? Right, this is the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and Kroger, a massive grocery store chain, paid them a lot of money, I hope. I hope they got a lot of money for this, to essentially take this thing over, right? And so all of the signifiers and structure and the things that of the genre of newspaper that I would be expecting as a user to be able to navigate and understand that environment and to learn what's going on in my world, it's kind of disappeared. And now it's this, mostly it's a conglomeration of delicious summer fruit and mattresses, which is kind of weird because the red color is basically the same all the way through there. Labor Day savings, and some sort of cookout signifier with the hot dog and the fork. Anyway, if you break this down into the information in this environment, the signifiers you're getting, it's a lot of overwhelm. I don't know how effective it is in terms of actually going to Kroger to get anything. At this point in time, it wasn't like I could click on this and then order some watermelons and hot dogs right online, especially, right? I think that's more of a thing now, but still, like you have to wonder about the effectiveness of using an information environment this way. But what this is really doing, and the point I'm getting at, is this is obliterating what a human is actually trying to use in terms of understanding and sense making in their environment and finding out how to move forward, which is navigation. So it's helpful to call these kinds of examples out, right? Because there's organizational dynamics that can really erode the way that we frame a lot of the areas of our work, not just navigation design. And in many cases, organizations we work with or for can actually get in their own way because they're making a lot of assumptions about the way humans understand the environment that they're engaging them in. So there's several reasons for this sort of dynamic, and not just that organizational, splash pagey stuff, but just in general, the way we talk about navigation. One is that organizations, as we all know, tend to make their decisions inside out, right? I loved this tweet a good while ago from Jen Simmons, where she says how most websites today really are thinking this way. What the org wants the customer to do is front and center. What the customer wants to do is this little slender thing. Yeah, you can go up there to find the thing you're really here for. And there's lots more of like what the org wants you, what your org wants you to do, right? It doesn't mean you can't do any of that, but the contextual thinking of well, wait, what is the user here for? What signifiers are going to make sense to them based on why they're here, versus all the stuff that we're shoving at them. That is one reason why we tend to conflate these things, because by squeezing what we mean by navigation into that tiny place, it fits the values and the priorities, right, of the organizations that are paying to make stuff. Another reason why I think it's kind of gotten squished this way is the atomized way that work is assigned and produced. And again, I'm not dunking on Agile. There's a lot of brilliant, wonderful things that Agile can do in terms of the principles behind it, but the way that it gets built out and actually manifested in a lot of organizations can often break things down in ways that are not holistic, right? So saying navigation is taken care of by menus allows us to have a lot fewer user stories to take care of. As a user, I need to navigate the application. Yeah, sure. We still have to break the work down somehow, but we also have to remember that navigation is more like a theme that involves multiple features and stories. We wouldn't do that to a user behavior like shopping, right? So if a retailer, if you said, okay, well, yeah, there's the Agile story on the board for shopping, or you click 40 clicks down into Jira someplace and you find that one little, there's the navigation story, or there's the shopping story. Well, no, shopping is the whole reason the website is there, if it's a shopping website. I would argue the same thing is true for navigation. You need to think about navigation as a theme. It's an overarching thing that's going on in the environment that manifests in multiple ways. Okay, not just one way. And some of this is just the way that language works. Similar to how synecdoche works, where we refer to something by referring to a part, like give me a hand. Except we do this a lot with technology because technology is so abstract. So we end up using a lot of words in ways that can more easily end up conflating things or squishing things together in ways or merging things. Because it's abstract, it's easier to do that. If you've got a hammer and a nail, you really can't combine those because they're physical things, right? But when we're talking about all this abstraction in technology, it's really easy for things to kind of shrink this way. Folks often will say, like, my internet went down. Well, okay, but it's not really your internet, it's your Wi-Fi connection, or it's your whatever. And in order to really diagnose what's going on, you actually have to unpack what you mean when you say my internet went down, or let me plug in my GPS in my car. Well, really, the GPS is the entire global positioning system, including the satellites, right? But this is just the way we use language, and it's fine. It's for conversational use. But when we're professionals talking about human behavior in information environments, we need to not fall for our own figures of speech. We need to pick that rock up and see what's underneath it. So humans actually navigate their environment by using the whole environment. That is how we evolved. As practitioners who pay attention to the architecture of environments we make, and of course, I wrote this originally for the Information Architecture Conference, so it's basically about information architecture. But of course, hopefully, if you're doing user experience design, you're doing information architecture. We need to listen to the best research and guidance that we have in our field on matters like this. And the thing is that there's plenty of research and writing going back decades that tells us about how humans navigate their environment by whatever they can find, whatever they can use in that environment to understand it and make use of it. A major contributor to the science of how people interact with information, Marcia Bates, presented a keynote to the Information Architecture Conference in 2018 about rethinking our frame for how we design interaction and architecture for screen-based environments to make use of the faculties that we evolved with. And she asked, how can we make the experience of a device feel and behave more like the world that made our species bodies and brains, right? The world that our species evolved in shaped us into what we are so that we fit, so that our perception systems and our cognition and everything fits that environment, so that we can, otherwise we wouldn't have survived. So when we create these artificial environments, what can we learn about the way humans actually make use of everything around them? Sometimes, most of it even unconsciously and not in an explicit, more of a tacit way. How can we learn about how people engage their environment as embodied beings, then to understand, okay, well, how do we use that for these abstracted places that we make? And the thing is that we really kind of know this lesson intuitively. I mean, this is why we put things that we really want people to notice in the middle of their field of vision, both in physical and digital places. And the question is, are we doing it responsibly? Like on the left here, this is a glass window. So this is why, by the way, many office windows now have these, there'll be decals or like frosted, visual little stripes and shapes and things kind of in them. You can still fully see through them, but it's just enough to sort of tell you're not quite paying attention to where you're walking brain that maybe I shouldn't walk through this window. So of course, I mean, typically you don't see a sign like this unless somebody has walked through that window before, and it had to be replaced, right? Maybe twice. So you put something right in front of somebody's face, right? You're not putting it way up top. If it's important, you want them to see it right there. We do this in digital all the time too. Not always in a way that's all that helpful, but sometimes it really is, by like, hey, we want to make sure people see there's a big sale going on right now. The question is the way you're doing it like helping or hurting? Like, what's the trade-off in that environment for the way you're showing that information? Are we thinking, well, the navigation's taken care of because the menus are there, so again, we can just put whatever we want in the middle of this field of vision? It's important to think past that. So again, even just with screens, right? We're still just talking about things I do on a screen, a phone screen, a computer screen, a kiosk screen. Menus are fine and important, and we need to design them well. But we also need to put that in context. The menu system is only part of how people are finding their way and understanding this whole screen-based environment. Again, navigation is what people do. Menus are just one way that they do it. So part two, here's the thing, just because most of what many of us are paid to work on is individual sites, applications, touch points, we really shouldn't frame navigation only in those terms either. So let's expand outward to what I'm calling everything here. Part of everything are the services that we interact with over multiple contexts, including screens. I recently tried to understand why some photos that I created on one device were not showing up on another device in my tangle of web of Apple ecosystem devices, right? I've got an iPhone, I've got an iPad, I've got a work Mac, I've got a personal Mac. My wife's got similar stuff, and we've got a HomePod. We've got, like, you know, we're bought in. Not that we're loving it that much because it's kind of a mess, but you know, we're bought in, and trying to understand what's going on with my photos just keeps being this brain pain problem that I keep running into. If you look at just these two paragraphs, like these just left me feeling confused and frankly kind of stupid. There are so many nouns in this. I have no clarity about what they're referring to. There is no way to understand how this language really means anything. I'd have to sit down with Visio and map all this out with like UML or something to understand just how to use my damn phone, right? And I do this for a living. I mean, I use this technology. I'm very much a native with all of this, but this continues to confuse me. This is word salad, right? It's word salad with like razor blades mixed in. It's just treacherous. Our job is to help people navigate environments, especially information environments. And those aren't always just on a single screen, right? Increasingly, they're ecosystems of abstraction with vaguely defined rule sets, foggy object definitions. These are information environments too. And this one is just not easy to navigate. And you'll notice that like just this note, right? There's nothing for me to tap or anything here, but it's the bones of it. It's the taxonomy that sits underneath all of this that is adding so much to this confusion, because the logic of it is just so hard to parse. It's using metaphors in weird ways. It's just a strange ecosystem. So part of everything is all these screens that we deal with in cross-channel ecosystems and the language that is being used to explain what the screens are and what's happening in the screens, but also all the information that we're trying to make sense of that lives behind those screens. So what I'll show here is these little clouds of meaning, right? There's a lot of information architecture required to bring clarity to these underlying meanings that drive an ecosystem. But often, again, because the way organizations are run and the way work gets made and things get delivered, there's often not I mean, you'll see engineers getting together and figuring out how to make sure, you know, the information, the data from this place ends up in this place, and we've got an API for this and a thing for that, right? For the engineering side, like they have to have those standards figured out, or all the plumbing doesn't work. But for some reason, for the way we actually communicate on the front stage to people, it gets overlooked a lot. And that is a huge information architecture challenge. And it, of course, overlaps with content strategy as well. So even Disney. So poor Disney, the parks are having a hard time right now. But at the conference where I first gave a version of this talk, that was in Orlando, Florida, and I took a day because I'd not been to Disney World in forever. So I was like, I'm going to treat myself, go for a day, and I'm going to do the whole, like, I had not been since they had rolled out the Magic Band and all that, right? So I was like, I want to experience all this. I'm a user experience design person. I've been hearing about this for years. I want to like see what this is like. And you know, Disney does so many things so well, and they've really pioneered amazing stuff, especially in cross-channel experience design. But even they can still do better with making these environments navigable. And so in this case, it took me over a week to figure out that the various touch points for purchasing a ticket and reserving rides with FastPass were asking for a piece of information that for some reason I could not figure out, like how to how to get this information or find this information or use this information in order to complete the process. It was because it was using 3 different names for that information in all the different ways that I was being communicated to. Each touch point made sense by itself is the funny thing here, right? Some team somewhere made each of these touch points so that in itself, it was pretty clear. The language actually made more sense within its little bubble than a lot of other things that I use. The problem was the connections to connecting the dots between these different touch points in this service ecosystem. Okay, I can navigate the app just fine within the app. The interactions were clear. It was pretty. It was great stuff. But the architecture of this ecosystem, that's what I could not navigate. And this is the sort of thing that often experienced designers have very little say over because it's being driven by back-end databases, business rules, separate silos in the organization. But that's a frontier that we need to keep exploring, because how can people navigate what we make if we aren't working to influence the underlying architecture of data and operations? And I bring up this example also because these weren't just interactions on screens. They were integrated with physical objects and environments in the park, which is where our industry is today in general. We're saturating our built environment with invisible nodes and meanings. At Honeywell, where I work in a division that is all about Internet of Things. It's all about sensors in industrial environments to understand like airflow and fluid flow and comfort level of the environment, traffic flow in the environment, for people who are really trying to manage their built environment, whether it's an industrial plant or a building or an airline. Because there's a ton of money to be saved in energy expense and other things, right? If they can understand their environment as an ecosystem better. That sort of technology is rolling out everywhere, right? But as well as in things like retail and other environments, other kinds of services. So what good is nice navigation in the app, right, if the rest of it is hard to understand and to find your way through? And there were challenges. Like, I will say that I was impressed with some things, but I learned later that a lot of the Magic Band technology had bigger aspirations than Disney was actually able to make good on. So it ended up being kind of a less aspirational version of what it was originally meant to be, but it was still interesting and it was still helpful in my experience in the park. But there were parts of the service that were a little janky, but I won't go into all that. The thing is, though, that here, think about this. Disney is one of the largest corporations on the planet. They have enormous resources, and they own every square inch of this park. They own every bit of the applications and digital and databases and everything that I was using. They either own or they license from somewhere as a third-party service. If anybody could orchestrate and craft and choreograph all of this, Disney should be able to. But it isn't perfect because it's really, really hard to do, right? It's really hard to do. And so, one, that helps me feel a little better about things that I work on where we can't seem to always get all the dots connected the way we would want. But it's also a lesson for our industry that, like, there's new ways maybe we should be working. There's new cross-silo ways or a broader, we maybe need to be thinking more about the whole stack, not just the layers that we're aligned to in our teams, in terms of how we make these things. So Disney is doing a pretty solid job, though, compared to something like the United States medical system, where we have to navigate between multiple providers, insurers, applications, websites, paper statements. You can get one outpatient simple surgery done and end up with 3 or 4 or 5 different providers sending you different materials, and your insurance company sending you stuff that you're not sure, do I pay this? Do I not pay this? Has this been paid? It is really confusing. There's a really big need. Well, there's a big need to clear the decks of all that, frankly, but and do something much more civilized, like some of you in other parts of the world have. But barring that, insurers and other service organizations could do a much better job of just connecting these dots for us, helping us navigate this world rather than only paying attention to their part of it that they're responsible for. Like my own health insurance provider had just had a big update that made the websites more navigable. Awesome. It's easier to use. Great. but it doesn't help me make sense of all the other parts of the ecosystem that they are paying partly for and that I'm paying for. So that broader system really needs some help. More recently, and I was tweeting about this a lot on election day here in the United States, and I shared some tweets from this thread. Someone who was a poll worker who also had a background in data architecture and database design was like looking around and sort of, you know, as designers, you probably have this this experience of you've got your designer glasses on all the time, right? And you're seeing things that maybe people around you who are just, you know, normal people who don't obsess about this stuff, maybe don't see, but are still frustrated by. And you're, you know, you're ever with a significant other or friends and you're just going off about like the menu in the restaurant or something, and they're like, oh, just relax. That's probably, I think, how this person felt. They were looking at all of they could see the points of data and they understood enough about what was going on underneath and the plumbing to go, oh my gosh, like this is a disaster because the systems thinking isn't there. The connecting of the dots isn't there. The definition of terms and how you get to somebody's name in the system and what the name, what a district is, they're all, I circled some things here, but there were just all these bits and pieces that just weren't lining up. Not unlike what I showed you in the Apple ecosystem situation, not unlike what I showed you in the Disney situation. Thing is, those other products are, I could take them or leave them. Like, you know, they're not gonna, it's not a catastrophe if that stuff isn't working, at least for me as a citizen. In this case, it is, and in the medical system, it is. You know, these are infrastructure, right, that we depend on for healthy, civilized life, and they need help. They need a lot of help. But I'll tell you, you know, when I registered to get an absentee ballot, my state, shockingly, actually had a really good interaction for that. It was great. Or if I wanted to find my polling place, it was great. But that's separate from the are you a registered voter still or not, or have you been kicked off the rolls? It's separate from a lot of the other pieces of the system, and this is where a lot of these problems ended up happening in our election. So there's not just screens and the meanings that we make manifest in them. There's also all the things in the world that make up everything that more and more require us to understand the whole system. Systems are environments and they need to be navigable, right? The whole thing, not just parts of it. And another thing that I say a lot about information architecture is the primary interface humans have for working with complex systems is language. And when I'm saying language, I mean all kinds of marks and meaning, right? Iconography, words, things that the linguistic constructs that we use to bridge meaning and to convey meaning and communicate things. That is the layer that we're using, and making sure that that language is clear and coherent and consistent is job one. I mean, it's a baseline, it's table stakes just to make sense of these systems, but it gets overlooked a lot because people take the language part for granted a lot. I come back to this quote a lot from members of our own community in the excellent book, Pervasive Information Architecture, that we say navigate, but we really mean understand. Navigation is a handy label for really talking about how humans are perceiving and acting in environments, so as to understand what that environment is and how it works and where to acquire the resources that we need as humans. Understanding isn't an abstract state of being, it is work. It is a human body figuring out what to do moment by moment in the entire world that it is living in. And this touches on something that's become more and more important to me, which is a kind of radical reframing of what we're doing when we're making these environments. And when I say radical, I mean the etymology of radical is root. Getting at the root, like getting underneath, digging past all the layers of language abstraction and digital and culture, and getting down to what is the human as an organism doing in its environment, and how are we making sure that we're bridging that last mile, right, between all this complexity and what a breathing, eating, burping, sleeping, anxious human being is trying to do just to get through their day. We're asking people to navigate not just the things we put in the world, but the world that we changed with those things, right? We have, when we put things in the world, we're changing the world with them, because it's altering the environment in some way, right? And if we want people to interact with the things that we put in front of them, it has to fit, it has to make sense. I think of it like a mobile, like a Calder sculpture, you know, where if you add one thing to it, the whole thing has to shift. Even if it's a small thing, it has to shift some. When we do a design intervention, as they like to say in some circles of design academics, a design intervention is we're intervening in a world that's already in play, that people are already doing things in. It doesn't come into being because we stuck an app in front of them. How are we making sure that we're attending to and understanding how things shift when we put something in that world and change the way it's going to make sense for people? So this is what I'm getting at when I say everything. It's not the world, but the dynamic between people and the world that they're trying to understand. And there's that tiny dot of menus. It's important, absolutely, but it is just a small part. So this is, again, one of my current obsessions is how we might model a person's everything, not just their journey with a service or just their mental model of a specific product. That can come later, but rather, how does a person figure out how to meet their needs in general over time? And first, what is the conceptual architecture of a person's life as they see it, right? I'm a self, I have family, I have work, shelter, food, education. By the way, this sort of modeling is in the vein of something called ecosystem mapping, which is, I think, is a really powerful tool that you can use, especially if you're really grounding it in the root of an embodied person. You know, I'm sitting here, I've got a room around me, I've got a neighborhood, but I've also got these other layers of things that I'm interacting with, like I'm interacting with many of you, and none of you are in my neighborhood, I don't think. If you are, come by and say hi at a distance. But we have these other layers now, right, that are changing what here means, what our place means. That's important to think through and not just micro focus on this one thing that we're putting in front of somebody. And when a new situation arises, how might we determine what category of situation gives rise to what categories of needs? Again, I think that frameworks and some sort of systemic way of thinking through this can be really helpful for how we make stuff. And then for any given category of need, what categories of resources are people tending to want or require to take care of those needs? You know, COVID did a really, it's done some awful things. But one thing that it's done that is maybe, I don't know, neutral or a thing to learn from, of the many things to learn from, is as soon as so many of our services and things I guess I'm saying it overnight, it made us have to treat our environment radically differently. And we had to relearn how to get at resources that we needed, right? And the market around us had to suddenly shift to thinking a little laterally and differently about how do we give people services that they need, because we can't assume that they can just all pile into physical places together for some indeterminate amount of time. Unless, of course, you're like some parts of the world that just decided, oh no, just go ahead and do that. But setting that aside, for those of us who, you know, are trying to be responsible, like what do we do, right? And I think it's a lesson in how fragile, in some ways, a lot of the assumptions are that we make about how people can access and understand and navigate their environment just for basics that they need in their daily lives. So what parts of their life are they needing to make sense of, right, in order to understand those resources and whether those resources will meet their needs or not? And ultimately, this dynamic is the ecosystem that we are designing for, not just the touch points, which are really only, again, visitors in this person's life. The things we make are visitors in the arc of this person's story. People don't start navigating because we put a screen in front of them, or a product or a service in front of them. People are already navigating every moment of every day, trying to meet their needs with the resources they can find and understand. So how are we honoring that? So hear me out. I am not saying that, you know, Now go back to work, and if you need to be the semantics police, and if somebody says navigation about a menu, no, that's, you know, I actually heard at a conference that you shouldn't use that word that way. You're not going to make any friends, and you're not going to really change any behaviors. The truth is, a lot of the people we work with and ourselves, like, we'll call the menus navigation. That's fine. What I'm saying though is, as soon as it comes up, try to make a mnemonic device or something to go, okay, cool, yeah, that's navigation, but let me think about a few circles out from that. Like, okay, well, what else is this person trying to navigate? Because really the menus are there to help them navigate something. Nobody's navigating menus just to navigate menus. It is toward navigating an environment. So let's always remember, what is the environment they're navigating, and then what patterns or things do we need to create? What clarity, what bone structure architecturally underneath do we need to create to make that environment understandable? Actually, video game design, it has to nail this, or else video games are you can't understand them, you can't learn them, you can't move around in them and be successful in them. Gamers get frustrated if it turns out that a thing means something different here than it does over there. They'll just go play a different game. So there's a real pressure in a way on video games, because especially like open world type games in particular, where you've got to have really tight clarity around what the signifiers are and what the rules behind those signifiers are, or else people just say this is a bad game, it gets a bad rating, I'm gonna go play a different game that's better. There's lots of places like that I think we can learn more about, figuring out these systems of clarity and meaning, and then figuring out what are the modes for how someone is navigating that environment. So navigation includes menus, but navigation is really about everything, and people navigate using everything that they can. So how are we making sure that we're really thinking about the rest of that, and what that means? Okay, that is my message for today, and thanks. It is not terribly long, so we have some time for questions, or for everybody to go get a drink in your virtual pub or wherever you're going. And awesome. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Andrew. Yeah, it was awesome. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, please drop them in the Q&A box. Yeah, no, I absolutely love this presentation. I loved how you spoke about semantics and meaning, and it kind of made me think about kind of our own industry in a way, and kind of the job titles we have for essentially the same thing, that kind of UX designer, UX UI designer, experience designer, UX architect. Are we like would you say we're kind of potentially guilty of making like the services we offer difficult to navigate for clients and stakeholders and that kind of thing?
Should I keep, if there are questions, should I keep presenting, or do you want me to close that and just do camera?
It's entirely up to you.
I think I'll do that. Okay, because I can't see you with that playing. I think I'm not presenting now. Oh no, I am. Never mind. I'll stop. Okay, now we're back. Hi.
Cool. Yeah, we're still waiting for some questions to come through. So if anyone does have any, then please let us know.
I did see one little comment there about Apple products don't need documentation. They're totally intuitive, and or someone said it makes me smile every time somebody says that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's a lovely myth for Apple, and it really goes back. I mean, here's the thing: is that goes back to the original Macintosh paradigm, where the aim was just let the interface kind of speak for itself in a way, with all these objects, these skeuomorphic signifiers that of desktop and folders and things. It was a massive leap forward in terms of bridging that divide of abstraction, right? But you still had to learn, right? You still had to learn. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when I first had to use a mouse, and it was harder. It was weird. It was like trying to learn to ride a bike. And now it's second nature, but even that, right? And then learning that, oh, it's a folder, but it doesn't really work exactly like a physical folder, because I could put as many folders and folders as I want. I can't do that in my filing cabinet. Anyway, so yeah, there's even a learning curve with that. it's important for us not to get tricked by, also it's important, I think, not to get tricked by I think which is kind of a canard that is, if it's good design, it doesn't need to be explained. The thing is that unless what you're putting in front of someone is only using interaction paradigms that they've already learned, if they're having to learn anything new, they're gonna have to learn it. And so you may have to explain it, right? So that some of these bromides that we use, we need to complicate them some as designers, I think, and not oversimplify what we're doing. Anyway, I see model a person's everything. What ways do you do that? What you include? Simon, hi Simon. As I said, it's kind of an idea that I want to do more of. When in my last job I was in, which was an insurance, a major insurance provider here in the United States, we started down a road of trying to do that, but there was too much other work to do, and it seemed academic, I think, to some folks, and we didn't get a lot of traction. In my current job, for the last year and a half, we really just, it's a brand new user experience practice in a brand new division that is really very much a startup within a corporation. So we've really been just getting a lot of the foundations in place. We haven't really gotten to a point where we can do, I have aspirations to, once we've got our table stakes down, operations wise, design system wise, everything else, what I want to be able to do is then to build on top of that and extend our design system to think about what environments are people in when they're using these interactions. If you're in an industrial plant versus and you're walking the floor and observing things versus sitting behind a desk in an office, you know, handling the service technician traffic and things like that. But really modeling that piece. But we have been doing it some. I mean, we use some ecosystem mapping with for some of our application developers, because a lot of our internal tools we're building out are there to enable rapid application design, so or rapid application development. And so we wanted to understand them as personas, and so I had the team do some ecosystem mapping. And it really helped clarify the fact that, like, oh yeah, this new tooling and this new way of creating an application that we're rolling out to them, it is this very tiny part of their world, and it isn't that clear to them, and yet they still have all these other pressures on them to deliver things on time and to get stuff made. And so they end up, you know, just using what they know how to use rather than adopting the new thing. And it helped really bring some clarity to, oh, okay, yeah, just because they're developers doesn't mean they automatically are just going to jump right in and understand things that other developers have made. So you know, using some of these techniques, just of saying who is the person, what is the real situation they're in, not just the thing we're making for them, but the rest of their world around them, and then how is the thing we're trying to get them to use situated in that, and then what pressures are on it, and how is it affecting, or other things affecting it. I think that's a really powerful tool. So I would recommend doing that. Let's see, I remember okay. How would you balance between discoverability and clarity? So I think we're talking about in an interface, right? And sort of related to that hamburger question. The thing is, discoverability and clarity are both important, and you're always having to move the slider, you know, between, like, do we cram everything into an environment, all the signifiers? Do we just do a few? Do we do narrow, deep, or broad and shallow? And I hate to give you this answer because it is such a cop-out, but it really does depend. But it's not a cop-out, because that's part of what I'm getting at is the screen we make that we put in front of somebody really ought to be a manifestation of what we understand about the broader environment and the kinds of people and what they're trying to do. What is their perception and action? What are they going to recognize? What's important to them, right? And this really is what undergirds what personalization as a strategic rubric should be about, right? Is, you know, and of course we need to do it ethically, but understanding more about who the person is who's engaging this, and then making sure the things that maybe are more important to them based on what they're trying to do, or who they are, what their role is, and all of that is important in terms of being clear. Because really, when we say clarity, it has a lot to do with relevance. Is it relevant? Is it recognizable? Is it something that is hitting the bullseye of what they're there for, what they're trying to do? But I think that sometimes the question of discoverability versus clarity gets caught up in an aesthetic conversation, which isn't bad in and of itself, but that's not the only conversation, right? So, there's been trends for years now to kind of go to, well, there's one call to action. So let's just do a big, beautiful splash photo, one call to action, one little menu. Look how simple this is. Yeah, but it's overly simple. Like, it isn't clear. Because sometimes clarity requires discoverability. Sometimes clarity means I actually have the things in front of me that matter, even if it isn't very pretty, or even if it means there's multiple things to focus on, because maybe in this context, that is important. So it is a complicated question, right? So it really, this is what makes our jobs hard and interesting, is you can't just decide it once and then you're done. Like, you really have to keep evolving that and figuring out what is clear and discoverable in one point in someone's journey or in someone's task may not be necessary 10 minutes later, right? Because maybe they've learned that part and now they don't want that done that way. I've been in organizations where, like, Google search, people fixate on Google search, and they say, look how simple it is. It's just the one line. You just type a thing in there and it just does it. It's like, well, no, it isn't simple. It's actually super complex behind the scenes. And it's making use of the entire internet, right? That doesn't necessarily work the same in other contexts. So I mentioned video games earlier. So one of the things in our own company that we've been working through is, so if someone is running an industrial plant or multiple industrial plants, and they've got all these dashboards they're using to keep up with, chemical flow and temperature and just insane complex things, then well, how might, there's one school of thought that's like, well, they've got thousands, millions sometimes of assets that they're keeping track of, like, that are all part of these industrial plants, all the moving parts of them, right? And so we should, but there's also things like financials, and there's other categories of information. And so there's one school of thought that says, well, we should just give them one global search, just type whatever they want, and it's just going to magically give them all the things in this sort of federated, contextualized, like, results. But another school of thought is more like, and I don't know where I am on this. A lot of this, again, depends on what's possible, depending on your data situation and how smart everything is underneath. But really, a really clear, fine way to do some of this is to say, well, what are the categories of things that you need to search for? And let's contain them within specialized searches in an interface, in an environment that's really about those things, right? So, like, if I go to a retail website, I worked with a home improvement company a while back, so I'll mention them, Home Depot in the United States. So if I go to the Home Depot, it's a home improvement warehouse, big box store, to their website, finding a store is not included in the search on the website. When I search, it's for products, right? Or for content about how to use the products, like how to build a deck, or what kind of lumber I need. Finding a store is a separate search, because why would I mix it in with the other search? It's a specialized set of information that I need to figure out what store is near me that has what I need. And that search is actually packaged in multiple places in different ways, depending on what I'm doing. If I'm in the shopping cart, the search for a store that has what I need is different from, the interface is a little bit different from the one that I might pop up if I'm just now showing up to the website, just so I can get prices for my region, right? So, so thinking about how to break down the environment in ways that go past whatever ideology or oversimplified assumptions is really important. And it really gets down to, again, starting with the creature that's in your environment and what they're trying to do, and what's going to make sense to them versus preconceived notions that we have. Okay, and how best to come up with a navigation strategy to effectively cope with challenging smaller mobile phone screens. I mean, the mobile form factor, right? A lot of the answer to this question really gets into best practices around responsive design. It's how do I take something that I can spread out on a larger screen, and I'm going to have to stack it differently in a smaller space. It really, what it does then is it's putting even more pressure on that question of what's most important in the context of use of a mobile device doing a thing, as opposed to sitting at a desktop, right? And sometimes there is no difference. Sometimes the task is the same. You know, if I'm trying to like get an auto loan on my phone, we just recently bought a car, and I did almost all of it on my phone, because now it's just that as creatures we satisfy this, right? It's the thing that I had in my hand. I didn't want to have to like get my laptop out and plug it in or come into the office. And I'm doing my research on there anyway, and so it just sends me right in. And so, well, the industry has gotten to the point now to where I was able to do almost everything seamlessly on my phone, and I didn't really miss the spread of real estate, you know, that I would get. But I will tell you that at certain points in that work, there were moments where I was like, okay, I'm actually looking at several different resources to try to find cars. Car ratings websites. You've got these aggregators that aggregate automobile sales from lots of different retailers, and you've got specific retailers like CarMax is who I ended up using. And on a mobile device, it was just a pain to have to like flip between all the different screens to compare information. So I did end up whipping out my laptop sometimes just so I could see everything in place. And sometimes I don't know how you get around that. But again, it really gets down to what is the task people are doing, and how do you break it down into bite sizes in ways where they can still do that task in a smaller space. It's not there's not a one size fits all question at all. But that's why I keep again coming back to, you can't answer these questions in the abstract of like, well, what's the best practice? The best practice is to understand the human who's using their body in an environment to do things, and then starting from that root, right? And then going, okay, how can we best fit what they're trying to do in a given task with this information? How do we reprioritize the information? How do we make sure that they don't lose their place if they have to pop up a different browser window in their phone browser, because they're not going to be able to have them both side by side, and things like that. So I think I answered the questions, and we have just a couple minutes. Anybody else? And if not, that's fine. This is great. Oh, hiding the milk. I don't know what that means. I'm sorry. Does anybody know what hiding the milk means? I am lactose intolerant, so maybe I just don't comprehend the question.
That's interesting.
I need help. I need help navigating this question. Oh. So it sounds like what you're talking about is how in a physical retail environment, they'll put some of the most common things of the other end of the store to just so people will have to go and get them. So I think this taps into an interesting question around value exchange, and thanks for asking this, because it gives me an opportunity to mention service design. So I think service design as a discipline is in some ways like the discipline of our moment, because it's kind of about everything. And it brings systems thinking tools and ways of connecting lots of contexts and layers. And I mentioned earlier, like thinking about the whole stack, right? From the front end interaction all the way through the operations, all the way, that are enabling that in terms of people and operations in a service provider, and then getting into the plumbing underneath, all the IT stuff that's allowing all these services to happen, right? That broader view, that complex view, one part of service design thinking is about value exchange. It's not unique to service design, but it's a key piece. And the idea that as you're moving across a journey and you're having these interactions and you've got physical evidence or touch points or however you bake that, value is being exchanged between the service provider and the customer, right? I think in UX culture, you know, we're sort of like conditioned to think it's really all about the user, it's all about the user. But I think a lot of us are realizing we have to evolve past that, because the truth is that no company is going to just do things just that the customer wants, because they're going to go out of business. Customers want everything for free, and they want it right now. So there is value that the company needs to get, right? So there is a trade-off between, okay, well, are we inconveniencing the customer in some way that is counterproductive to them getting the value they need? Which means we're going to lose the customer. But are there things that maybe we do that maybe do add a little bit of friction or add a little bit of complication to their experience? Because one, we want to make them aware of other opportunities for things that may actually be relevant to them and they may actually want and spend money on. And I mean, I know I've benefited from this, like in Amazon or physical stores or wherever. I mean, problematic as Amazon may be, that I have seen things shown to me that I'm like, I did not think of that. You know, good. I'm glad I see that now. Or walking through a store, I'm like, oh yeah, I need, you know, soap, not just milk. Because you know what goes better with milk than soap. So having a store where it's like, hey, you have to actually walk through the store to get at some essentials that maybe you go to the store more often for. I don't think that's intrinsically bad. It's all part of the give and take, a value exchange, but you've really got to dig into like, okay, are we losing business by doing that? So the websites I showed you where you had things popping up on the screen, the one from Lowe's that just had the 10% off, it wasn't killing that whole environment. It was okay, right? And I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was actually situated, maybe not even on the home screen. It may have been in the application or in the appliances area or something, or the flooring. But even if not, right, it wasn't obliterating what I was trying to do, the way that really extreme, ridiculous clown makeup version of the Kroger with the newspaper. For one thing, I don't go to a newspaper in order to go to Kroger. I'm going to a newspaper to go to a newspaper. If I'm going to a retailer, at least the thing you're sticking in my face is something I can buy at your store. So again, thinking about these trade-offs and these touch points, and then that's a part of the testing of them too, right? Is to figuring out like, hey, where are the nuances of how to dial up or down, how much we might be adding a little bit of friction or adding a little extra complication to somebody's experience. But it's a way to, one, maybe show them things that they're actually in the market for and they may be grateful about, but two, for us to make more money, because we're a business. And that's not a bad thing necessarily, you know, within reason.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Andrew.
I think we're at time now. Yeah.
What a brilliant presentation. Thanks to everyone watching. We are back tomorrow with talks from Gabby Mitchum-Evans and Amber Polly of No Mensa and Kate Nightingale, founder of Style Psychology. There's still time to sign up for those, so head over to the Eventbrite page if you haven't registered already. Again, Andrew, thank you very much.
Sure, I'll get the slides out to y'all soon. And just a note to my friends at No Mensa, it's been too long. I miss you. Even some of you who come over to the States for things. I really hope to see you all again soon and have a pint or whatever before too long. So thanks for inviting me to this, and thanks everybody who joined.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Andrew. Cheers.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.